Hello and welcome to Reroll. My name is Angus Morrison, here today with a review of Amnesia, a Machine for Pigs, developed jointly by Frictional Games and the Chinese Room. Fair warning, though I'll avoid sharing major plot points, this review will contain mild spoilers by necessity. Proceed with caution. A Machine for Pigs releases on the 10th of September and is an indirect sequel to The Dark Descent, using the same world and lore but set in London at the end of the 19th century, amid Victorian industry that promised a strong contrast to the original's Prussian castle without sacrificing the dark horror that earned its fame. But if I didn't know otherwise, I'd say the sequel was a deliberate step back from the world of horror to something altogether less stressful. And don't get me wrong, the game has its moments, its jump scares, its thoroughly unsettling feel, but each feature that made The Dark Descent a truly nail-biting journey to hell has been stripped out. A Machine for Pigs feels hollow, as if Frictional bet everything on the story and forgot about gameplay. The premise almost mirrors that of the first game. After returning home from a trip to Mexico, you as Oswald Mandus regain consciousness without memory of recent events. In a fever, you respond to the disembodied calls of your children and make the descent through the machine below, this time to save, not murder, who you find. Descent is a theme repeatedly referenced, and your journey into the machine is in part an exploration of human morality, drawing very heavily from books like Frankenstein and The Island of Dr. Moreau. But while the subject might be discomforting, it's a story that's told and shown rather than engaged with. Your interaction with the world is severely limited. And it starts so promisingly. Given relatively free rein across 2 floors of a mansion, you're expected to explore a little, to inspect your surroundings without prompt in order to discover the way forward. And forcing someone to pay close attention to their surroundings not only causes them to search the darkest corners of your house of horrors, but keeps them distracted as something sneaks up behind. But sadly, that's the only task of its kind, and A Machine for Pigs immediately falls back upon the formulaic puzzles of its older brother, many of which have been copied wholesale. Those of you who have played The Dark Descent will immediately recognise the puzzle which requires you to mix chemicals together in order to melt an obstacle, for example. And I use the term puzzles lightly because while The Dark Descent would hide components across the length of a level, A Machine for Pigs makes them readily available. For one task, I had to slot different cogs into the correct place on a larger machine, cogs which conveniently lay within arm's reach. Another wanted me to start a furnace using coal that was sat next to the furnace. Then it had the gall to ask me to repeat it. Twice. At one point, Mandus even references the fact that you're being made to jump through hoops, stating, "I cannot help but feel I am trapped in some great game, forced to undertake endless Herculean labours for the promised reward of my darling children." Rather than set a real brain teaser, Machine for Pigs presents you with a series of distractions so it can keep on spinning its tail. Of course, pace is no bad thing. In The Dark Descent, you are pushed forward by the threat of the nightmare chasing you and your rapidly dwindling light resources. You had to keep moving or you'd go insane and die. But Machine does away with this entirely. No longer are you pursued by an unknown force, and no longer does the darkness itself present any kind of threat. This is a crying shame because the need to balance stealth with failing sanity in the original was a real source of fear. In the sequel, you have an infinite light, and in any case, the shadows do nothing to your health. As a result, there are no resources to manage, no incentive to explore a world which is already more linear than the first, and survival horror comes to resemble more of a theme park ride. The caveat attached to your infinite lantern is the way it signals your presence to enemies, which would be a strong argument for caution if Machine's monsters posed any threat. They are phenomenally slow, and as I mentioned, the insanity mechanic is no longer in play, so you're best served simply sidestepping and jogging on your way. Frictional and the Chinese Room also appear to have forgotten about the powerful fear of the unknown. Your enemies spend the early game running away from you, so by the time you encounter hostiles, you have a clear idea of what you're up against. Things weren't helped by the fact that my first encounter bugged out in a big way, running at me but being entirely unable to do damage. I sat back, studied my foe, and calmly plotted my next move. I don't mean to dismiss the game entirely. Though the gameplay is one-dimensional, its setting is an exciting change from the stone walls of Brennenburg. The Dark Descent featured the sinister Machine Room, and the devs have built on this foundation to create a truly twisted world of steel, science, and broken morality, a more relevant horror than gothic fantasy. The world looks truly evil, and though the constant fear of the first game is dulled, you never completely relax. You're always unsettled, expecting an escalation which doesn't come beyond the basic jump scares. Industrial London has given the audio team great scope to mess with the player too. Metal clanks and groans as it condenses, pipes gurgle with hidden contents, and the sporadic roar of the machine will startle even the hardiest adventurer. Ultimately, A Machine for Pigs has an interesting story. It's highly derivative, but one that you'll probably be inclined to follow all the same. The amnesia, the fact that Mandus knows as little about the place as you do, unravelling the past as you move through the world, is its most compelling feature. But the developers are so focused on telling their story, they forgot people would actually have to play it. Mechanically, A Machine for Pigs is a series of uninspiring tasks, many of which are lifted straight from the Dark Descent, broken up by light cardio when the monsters come a-knocking. The truly scary mechanic of insanity has been stripped out, and with it all incentive to explore or use caution. The industrial setting does manage to generate some much needed tension, but horror fans will be leaving dissatisfied.